that puts us into the sympathetic. But when do we stop and recover? When I worked with athletes, we pushed them hard in training and then we recovered them. And we discovered that the recovery was more important than the training.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But we don't recover. We don't have, particularly in the corporate world, there's not a recovery. So that's one thing about anxiety. It can simply just be fatigue. Now, the other one is it's trauma. It can be lots of little traumas. But for me, the greatest trauma of all is the feeling of being unloved or unlovable.
Yeah.
And deep down, sadly, for so many of us, when we look in the mirror, we don't see someone we love. We don't see someone that we speak kindly to every day. We don't see someone that we make time for every day. In fact, we're always trying to prove ourselves to something or somebody. We're always trying to find something or have something so that we can feel enough.
Right.
But you're enough right now.
Right. Yeah.
So I think that internal self-image is so important. And for many of us, just that feeling of being unloved is actually what drives our anxiety.
Yeah. I mean, I often look around and most people are walking around in some state of trauma in some way, right? In varying degrees, whatever it is, little ones, big ones, whatever it might be. And people act from that space a lot of times, right? And so it's when you were talking about food and eating, properly to sustain ourselves, what came to mind when you were talking about that was like, to me, it almost has to start with this acceptance of being willing to love yourself enough to do these things for yourself. Right. Because a lot of times this pushing and constant going, and we have to, like you were mentioning with the athletes where they're pushed to the limits, but then there's also that pullback, that balance, right. That gives them recovery, and recovery is not encouraged in most of the world. It's not encouraged in the corporate world, right. It's push harder. And in that pushing harder, sometimes I think when we think about caring for ourselves, it's almost that pushing harder has taken on the definition of how to care for yourself or something. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, because that's what's encouraged. That's what other people are, quote, doing. So if they're doing it and they have this life and they look so great on the surface, then maybe I should do that too. Right. There's no balance there.
No, we wrongly linked productivity and busyness to self-worth. So if I get a load of stuff done, I had a good day. Yeah. And a day where I get nothing done was a bad day. So we have outlawed just being. So what are you doing at the weekend? If someone has a great plan, I'm doing this, I'm going to the beach, we have a picnic, I'm going to a movie, and then I'm getting home, and then I'm going out, then I'm going to the bar, then I'm having a few drinks. Gee, that's a great weekend. The guy that's just sitting watching movies, that's a bad weekend. But really, when we sit, what's going on here? This person that's always doing something, this person that's doing 10 things at the weekend.
Yeah.
What's that doing to their immune system? What's it doing to their sense? So we can disguise, if we're doing lots of good things, we can disguise distraction. So what I say is busy is the enemy of excellence.
Yeah.
And then distraction is the disease. Because when we're distracted, when we can't be still, we're missing the universe as it unfolds.
Yeah.
Life is roughly 900 months and we sleep 300, which means we roughly get 600 waking months on this planet. And for me, half those are gone already. So I'm looking at less than 300 months left to go. So what am I rushing towards?
Yeah. Yeah.
Why would I not want to slow time down, become more present with a hug, more present with the people I love? So for me, this idea of busy and distracted, it's the opposite to how we should be living our life. Yeah. Calm and present.
Yeah.
But when people become present, what we're finding is people are finding it hard to be by themselves.
Yeah.
There is a disconnect within people between the person that I truly am and the person that I'm trying to be, between the job that I'd really love to do and the job that I'm doing, between the relationship that I'm in and the relationship. So we settle, rather than going after the life that we dream about, we go after the life that we think other people would want us to have, or we go after the life that we think would make us successful in other people's eyes. So therefore we value social affirmation more than personal expression. Right. And we start to suffocate and stagnate our very spirit, our very soul, the essence of who we are becomes stagnated. So even when you're busy and you have the beautiful house and the beautiful car, and then you sit still, that little voice comes alive and says, but you know, we're not happy.
Yeah. What are we doing here? Yeah.
What are we doing? Why are we doing this for?
Yeah.
You cannot outrun the things that are in your heart. And you cannot outrun the things in your mind. You can run every marathon on the planet. You can climb every mountain. And the moment you stop, your inner voice, your soul is going to speak to you. We have to connect our life with our soul.
Yeah. And that, I want to switch gears and go to another topic, because this was, to me, probably one of my favorite parts of your book, when you talk about consciousness in the brain and your mind. And so in the book, you say how consciousness doesn't lie in the brain, and that our mind is not our brain, right? So you have all these distinctions for all that. And that was so fascinating to me, because I reread and read those pages again, because I was trying to, it makes sense to me and I get it, but I was trying to let that sink in so that I could understand how, knowing this now, how do I go forward? Like, that's a different way to think about your life. And so and then you also mentioned about how we have this element of being aware that we have this observer part of ourselves too, right? So we have all these parts that I think we're taught are all lumped together as, quote, the brain, right? That's all lumped in the brain. But I love how you dissected that. So can you go into that a little bit and explain to listeners?
Yeah, I mean, this surprised me as well. You know, so from when I was growing up, you believe everything was in the brain, and you believe that the brain controlled everything. But when you dig deep and you dig into the real science of the gut, you realize that the gut has neurons just like the brain.
Yeah.
You realize that there's a connection between the mind and the brain. It's called the gut-brain axis. And for years, people told us that it was one directional, that the brain up here made the decision and it sent it to the gut. Now we know, sorry, my laptop battery, just make sure it's okay. So now we know that the gut is capable of making conscious decisions by itself. And we know that that gut-brain axis is actually bidirectional. So there's a two-way process of communication. So in every decision you make, your gut is contributing to it. Then we go a little bit deeper and we look at neurocardiology, which means the heart has neurons by itself as well. And we begin to realize that when we make decisions, when we think about something, it's not just your brain and skull at all. There is something much bigger. We know then that the skin is sending senses all the time. So when you get a sense of something or a feeling of something or an intuition, if you think that's just coming from the brain and your skull, you've missed the whole point.
Yeah.
So the first thing about the brain is the brain in your skull is really important. But it can't really do what it does without the gut, which is now known as the second brain, or the heart. So when we talk about bringing the mind into coherence, it's about bringing the brain in the skull, the gut, the body into a state of coherence, which is a state of flow. Mm-hmm. So that's the first part. And then the second part to realize is that what neuroscience has shown us is that everything in the brain is chemical or electrical. So that's what it is. And if you look at brain images, it looks like a beautiful electrical storm in space. It's an amazing thing. And every thought is an electrical signal that's fired through a neuron. And then when you have a corresponding or connected thought, it links from one neuron to another, and we create neurological pathways. So every time we say something or do something, we fire that signal that wraps that pathway together, and they get connected. So there's constant electricity and chemistry coming on in the brain. But what we need to ask is the brain generating that electricity? Because your thought is the brain. Right. Your thought is what enters the brain. Now, when I heard neuroscience saying that, hold on a second here. The thought enters the brain. Yes. You ask a neuroscientist, from where? And that's where they have to put their hand up and say, we don't know. Yes. And in fact, only this year, in one of the biggest scientific journals in the world, the two questions they said, the two hard questions of science are, how did the world exist? Because the Big Bang Theory is kind of coming unstuck very fast.
Yeah.
And secondly, where does consciousness exist? So the simplest way to explain this is, if anybody goes on your TV tonight, and I don't know if I'm allowed to mention whatever your cable provider is, let's say it's Netflix. So you have a cable that goes from your box into the TV. The TV will display whatever the box shows it. Mm-hmm. So the TV is a real clever piece of equipment. It receives a signal, it makes sense of the signal and it broadcasts the signal. But if you pull the cable out of the TV, then what's left on the TV?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Yeah.
If you stop the signal from going to the brain has nothing happening. When we go a little deeper with the analogy of the TV, if you're watching a funny movie on the TV, does the TV start laughing?
No.
Is the TV even aware it's a TV?
No. Mm-mm.
Does the TV know you're in the room?
No. Some smart TV might, but most TVs, no, I don't think so.
So the brain has no awareness. The brain does not know it's you. So
this is so fascinating to me because it's such a different way to look at at everything, right? At everything. And so would you say then the mind is, I think you even say in the book, the mind, the body in that energetic field around us that then sends the signal to the brain? Is that how you would explain it?
Well, if you strictly go down the scientific route, what I can say is the mind is not the body. It's not the brain. It's not your shoulder. Science simply doesn't know. Science can tell you what the mind is not. But then science is unwilling to take the next step in answering, what is it then? We know we're energy fields.
Yeah.
The truth is, the thing that makes you, you. So when you think, there's a part of you that is listening to you thinking.
Yeah.
When you have a thought, there's a part of you that can hear that thought.
Right.
So if you really try to identify where that awareness is, it's almost like it's not in the body. So we have to really understand that the mind is not in the body. What blows our mind is when we realize that our body is in the mind. But that's not surprising, because if you go back to Einstein, what he's proven is every single thing in this universe is energy.
Yeah.
And energy can exist as a wave or a particle.
Mm-hmm.
But even the atom is 90% empty space. Even matter is just energy in a different form. So everything that's physical has its origin from an energy field. And everything moves from non-form or pure energy into form and then back into pure. So when we apply these simple scientific principles to the universe,
mm-hmm.
to Elon Musk and these guys, that makes perfect sense. But we forgot to apply it to ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we are energy fields. Now, that shouldn't be surprising, because if you listen to the word psychology, ology means study of, and psyche means soul. Neuroscience studies the brain and the central nervous system. Psychology studies the soul.
Mm-hmm.
We've known we are soul. We know we're spirits. We know people talk about there's a great spark, there's a great connection. We know all of this.
Right.
But we got so caught up in our limited scientific view that we began to believe that unless we can see it scientifically, it can't exist. But even now, science and thermodynamics, the second principle of thermodynamics is entropy. Even those hard scientists have run out of road, and they can't prove that consciousness is in the brain. But they're unwilling to say where it is. So whether they choose to believe in a soul or not, well, that's another question. But for everybody listening to this, I want you to know that you, the part of you that feels joy and love and happiness, is not in your brain. The brain is incapable of feeling an emotion. Sure, the brain can release a chemical, like people say, well, I feel happy because of serotonin.
Right.
But when you drink alcohol, the alcohol doesn't get drunk. So serotonin is incapable of feeling happy or sad. Ice doesn't feel cold or warm. The brain doesn't feel, it just produces chemicals.
Yeah.
You feel. And that's where the future of medicine, that is where the future of psychology is moving back to its beginning, to psychology, the soul.
And when you say you feel, so when we feel cold or we feel happiness, so that's our mind experiencing that?
That's your mind. That is your mind. Your mind is the total collection of the physical, first and foremost, the brain, the gut, the skin, all of that physical senses.
Yeah.
That relates to this physical world. but we also have a part of us that is not just of the physical